Hello, welcome to the Academy Management's 10th Scholars on Subject Matter Expert Scholar Panel. As I mentioned, this is the second in-person panel at the annual meeting here in Boston. Thank you to our scholar panelists for sharing their expert research-based insights on these critically important topics today. And thank you to everyone viewing live and via recording at a later time. The Academy of Management, or AOM, is the preeminent professional association for management and organization scholars. Worldwide members are professors and PhD students in business schools at universities, academics in related social science and other fields, and practitioners who value knowledge creation and application. Founded in 1936, AOM features a global community today that is nearly 20,000 strong and spans over 120 countries. Today's panel is titled AOM Scholars on Teaching Management Best Practices. For attendees, we'll welcome Q&A at the end of the panel. Simply raise your hand about the 45-minute, 50-minute mark, and then via Zoom, we'll answer via chat. For media that are attending, please access all research via press@aom.org. And thank you for your time. And without further ado, I'll kick it over to today's moderator, Todd Bridgman, Victoria University of Wellington.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks to everyone in the room and joining us online for this panel. So yes, my name is Todd Bridgman. I'm a Professor of Management Studies at Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand. My research is at the intersection of management education, management history, and critical management studies. So what I do basically is try and uncover what I call myths of management, foundational theories of management, Maslow's pyramid of human needs, Lewin's Changes 3 Steps model, Weber's theory of bureaucracy. And these ideas came to our field from other disciplines. And in exploring the way they're represented in best-selling textbooks, I argue that these are myths, that they have kind of been twisted or filtered through the business school values of productivity, of efficiency, and profit in ways that kind of don't do justice to the original founders of those ideas. And I argue that that does management, our students and practitioners a disservice in that we could teach management differently and do management differently. So very pleased to be moderating this session, and over to you, Carol.
So my name's Carol Kulik, and I'm a professor at the University of South Australia, UniSA Business in Adelaide, Australia. And my real passion is trying to take all of the great research that we do as management scholars on how to do people management, and trying to take that research and put it directly into the hands of current and future managers who can implement it. And to that end, I have recently authored a book with my colleague, Alyssa Perry, called Human Resources for the Non-HR Manager. It's written for all of those people who find themselves accidentally in management jobs without having the training to do it.
Thanks, Carol. I'm Margaret Heffernan from RMIT University in Melbourne, Australia. I'm a senior lecturer, but I'm also delighted tomorrow to accept the role as the Management Education Division of the AOM Chair-elect of PDW. So if any of you are into MED research, love to connect with you. I'm exceptionally passionate about management education because, as you'll hear later, I think we really have to disrupt our thinking about what we're doing. And I come through from a social constructivism lens. My big passion, and it feeds actually into this conference theme of the vulnerable and the marginalised, and how well do we understand their diverse needs, and particularly through a cross-cultural, trans-cultural lenses, what makes me get out of bed every day super excited. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Elena Obukova, and I'm an associate professor at strategy and organization at McGill University and in Montreal, Canada. I'm very happy to be here. My research focuses on, I'm very passionate in understanding social inequality, and my research focuses on how social networks and networking contribute to social inequality, particularly at the hiring interface. So one of my recent papers, to give an example, explores differences in networking behavior between men and professional women. I will also be presenting paper, I think, in 2 days about racial gap in referrals. So how easy or difficult it is for people from different racial groups to get referrals to get desirable jobs in high-tech firms. Aside from my research, I'm very passionate about teaching. and I teach international business with particular focus on information literacy and ethics. I will talk more about information literacy and the kinds of work I do in this area. Lastly, I'm very happy to say, as of like 5 days ago, I stepped down as a founding director of Laidley Center for Business Ethics at McGill University. But again, that highlights my deep commitment and interest in issues relating to how do we teach business ethics? How do we engage our students in these conversations?
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Christian Busch. I'm on the faculty of UC Marshall, and I'm looking into purpose-driven leadership, entrepreneurship, innovation, and mostly serendipity. So this idea of unexpected positive discoveries, how do we in organizations create those conditions? How do we facilitate them? I would be remiss to not mention Monday, 12 o'clock with Henry Mintzberg. We'll have a panel on serendipity and emergent strategy and how does this, all kind of come together. And so this is really something where we hope to shift serendipity from this kind of, a stepchild type error or variance to, hey, no, it's actually something we can study, something that's influenceable and something that we can create the conditions for.
Great. Thank you, Christian, and all the panel members. So the format is I'm going to pose a question and then invite the members of the panel to comment. So the first question, panel, is higher education has experienced massive change and disruption in recent years, a pandemic and a changing business landscape. What are the implications for business school curricula and pedagogy? Carol, you're going to start us off.
I am going to start because I think one of the most important implications of all of this disruption and change is we need to be really clear about how we define who is our student. I think back to when I started my academic career and I thought of the prototypical student, an undergraduate who had not yet started in the workforce. And I think now in management, we're responding to people who are already out there working and encountering new challenges that their education didn't prepare them for. I also think we have tremendous numbers of people who were trained in fine arts or technology or finance and end up in roles where they're actually managing people and they didn't get that piece in their education. So I think one of the consequences is I think management education is moving toward just-in-time delivery. We cannot always anticipate the future, but we certainly can respond to this broad audience's present needs. Now, I think that's challenging for us because we have to be super quick and super agile, but I also think it's super exciting and there's much more opportunity for us to co-design with partners.
Great, thank you. Margaret.
Yeah, and on that notion of co-design, I think multidisciplinarity is absolutely essential, that we cannot no longer exist in a silo. Let's go back 280 years ago in Australia. If you were a First Nations in Melbourne and you were coming onto my lands, I'd say woman jeka, which means what is your purpose? Please come in, do no harm. We'll collectively gather our knowledge and then we'll improve our lives. And I think in a way at the moment, transitioning out of the greatest crisis I've ever experienced in my lifetime, that we're really not sure what our purpose is anymore, that organisation and business are trying to recoup their lost profits, which have been significant. And at the moment, that's their central focus. But we as management scholars have a duty, I think, to really encourage our students to look at what they're doing in the management field. And goodness me, the business media every day is littered with stories of disaster, malpractice, unethical practice, whatever. I don't think at the moment we're doing a very good job, if I can be provocative. And I put myself in that pool of people because why are these behaviours happening? And I mean, this is one of Carol's expertise as well in trying to get good behaviour. So yeah, the pursuit of profit in our capitalist societies is critical. But to me, okay, yesterday there was lots of sessions on AI and through the conference, but when I was in the exhibition hall earlier, all I'm seeing in headlines on material all around that hall is student engagement, student engagement, student engagement. Now that's heart-led. And if any of you were in that fabulous relational workshop yesterday on how do we do this, I think we're a bit confused about our pedagogy at the moment. My university's just created a new strategy. And our signature pedagogy is authentic, applied, and active. Well, wacko, to me, that's not a pedagogy. And if we think of the four godgies, pedagogy, andragogy, herdagogy, and academagogy, we're really confused about this whole term. So I think as management scholars, we've got to have really deep discussions about what's our purpose. I'll leave it on that note at the moment.
Thank you, Margaret. I want to pick up on another theme and something that Carol said, and that theme is continuous learning. Once I read a book about engineers, and it said that after graduation, engineers use 10% of the knowledge they learned in college. I like, okay, so a lot of time wasted. I would like to hope that management students use a little bit more, but do you think it's 20%? Do you think 30? The point that I'm making is we spend a lot of time worrying about how much knowledge we cram into our students' heads. But the truth is, as we know, as most of you here working professionals know, what's really important is learning is a lifelong process. And after you leave college, you're going to keep on learning continuously. So the goal of college for me is not to cram facts into their little poor heads that are hurting because last night they were cramming for another exam. It's to teach them how they can learn on their own once they leave here. And this is why I really, really focus on information literacy, is how do you, after you graduate, you're going to go out there and you're going to keep on learning without me being there, giving you marks and telling you where the right or wrong answer is. This is very important. As we learned during COVID pandemic, distinguishing fact from fiction is extremely important. And a lot of us are not prepared. We don't know how to do this. We also saw it in a lot of political news, the what is biased news, and being able to identify that something is biased. Every year, I have a student who brings me something and says, you know, this is a really weird fact. And I'm like, wow, smells fishy. And I start digging and like, either this is a fake publication or it's, you know, somebody brought me something from a communist website. And no, that student was not well-read and very broad-minded. That student was extremely conservative, and they just didn't happen to check where the piece of the article came from. They didn't even question this. So I think these are important gaps in education. We used to call this critical thinking, but now we really need to think about this as it's an extension of critical thinking, information literacy, thinking about how do we, I do a lot of work on helping students learn about news, the news ecosystem. How do we find news? I had students write fake news stories in class, which, as I'm sure some of you know, that's one of the best ways to teach students about how to distinguish fact and fiction. So next time, you know, they're not going to be duped themselves. I've also done work getting students to write Wikipedia articles. You know, a lot of times we tell students, don't use Wikipedia. It's not accurate, right? But who here does not use Wikipedia? Be honest, who does not use? I use Wikipedia. In my slides, my definitions come from Wikipedia half of the time. I acknowledge that, but you know, that's where they come from. So instead of telling students not to do something, and we'll talk about AI more later, but it's the same pattern. We keep telling students, don't do this, don't do this. But we're not giving them tools. We're not preparing them to actually engage creatively, to access information, and to potentially create, learning how to create this information. Even if they're never going to create it again, once they do it once, they know where it comes from. They know what potential problems might be, and they're going to be much more critical consumers of information going forward. So that's what I'm deeply, deeply passionate about in my teaching. And I think that's where management education needs to do much, much better job, less cramming of knowledge and more about how do we know what we think we know and how we're going to keep learning going forward.
And I think that's where it gets really interesting, right? What is the role of the educator today? And I always love this Lee Bollinger idea that it's essentially to prepare our students for their journey into the unknown. Like in terms of, we don't know which jobs will be out there in 5 years. We don't know, how the world will look like. But what we can do is we can do our content, of course, but we can focus on mindset and social opportunity spaces. And so it's really the mindset piece. I think you touched already on the question of how can I, as a student, see that the world is full of paradox. The world is full of, yes, I want to plan, but then also the unexpected has to be part of the plan. Yes, I want to be friends with this person, but also this friends might vote for another party. How can I be friends with someone who is different than me? And so I'm a big fan on the mindset side to really put them into positions where they have to empathize with the other, So for example, simple Oxford style debate. You are all about purpose, great. So now take the Milton Friedman position that capitalism is all about money, and you argue the opposite position of what you believe in, and vice versa. And when you do that a couple of times, you learn to kind of semi-walk in someone's other shoes, but also to really understand their assumptions. And I think that's kind of a lot of times what gets lost in these conversations. We have all these kind of symptom conversations, right? Yes, this person's great, this person's bad. But what is the assumption behind that? Is the assumption that they will create a better life for us? Well, we both have the same assumption. We want that, right? So how do we find then the kind of interest-based idea behind that? And so I think there's a lot in there. Those of you interested, interest-based negotiation, right? How do we kind of learn about not arguing about positions, but about interests? So that's the mindset piece. And then on the other side, I think really the social opportunity space where, I'm sure you see that all, right? When you have people from especially less privileged areas who get a scholarship and everyone celebrates, great, you have a scholarship now. Well, the discrimination happens at the next level again. When they need a job, right? Then it's again, do I have the context and everything else? And so our role also being to create the social opportunity space to say, okay, when we have someone come in, no matter their background, here's a mentor, here's a support system, here's an ecosystem for you where you can thrive, and not one that assumes that you, when you do a MBA in consulting, that you now have a consultant as a mentor. Not at all, actually. That shouldn't be the case, right? Because then you put them into the box. But to really say, here's 3 mentors, one is a consultant, but the other one maybe is a politician or whatever it is, to really kind of also understand that you will connect the dots after and after and after versus when you come in. And I think that's really the key point. I feel that idea that if we want to be part of their journey into the unknown, we can give them a lot of clarity, but we can't give them certainty. And I think for them to see that it's okay to not have it figured all out, I think that takes a lot of anxiety off and then channels that kind of towards positive things versus like being stuck in, oh my God, the world is changing so fast.
These myths. So, my approach to teaching management used to be, let's learn these 10 theories of motivation so that when you go out, you can apply it in the workplace. But if the foundations of our knowledge are so shaky, I've come to the view, I think, that we should be, I guess, to focus on your point, Elena, focusing on how students learn and doing that through the content of management. So developing these critical thinking skills, challenging assumptions, as you said, Christian. And I think that's a really valuable takeaway, particularly in this environment that is changing so fast. Anyone else want to pick up on this?
Yeah, I think it's very complex though, because if we look at the diversity in our classrooms, I mean, in Australia, one of the greatest multicultural countries in the world, in a tutorial of 30 students, I can have 20 to 25 different nationalities. And I don't say that lightly. Now, if I'm taking a particular body of resources, I have to consider the cultural intelligence of every one of those students. I've got to look at their epistemologies of knowledge generation. What learning environments have they come out of, particularly with our international students? And if they haven't been schooled in Australia, where does that then pitch them in what we're trying to do? And it, in a way, leads into the second question about, which has got an ethics undertone. What is ethical business conduct in Australian society may not be the accepted ethics in other societies and contexts in which my students are going back to. And so it's really a broadening of that whole cultural intelligence, that's what I really want to make robust, them robust understanding of this fabulous diversity. I also try and knock out this notion of othering. You're others, you're minus me. I recently reviewed a journal paper and I really detest the word minority. To me, it's offensive. If you called me a minority, I would get extremely upset. So why, therefore, in our journal articles, do we refer to as some of our sample sizes of this minority group or skin colour, black and white? I just cannot accept it as reasonable. And it's up to us to lead by example. So around ethics, I mean, and AI is dominating our thinking at the moment. It's really my discussions with my students in the first couple of weeks about academic integrity is not our policies and rules about student misconduct. It's about their ethical attitude towards themselves. And I've done a lot of work with our First Nations people in Australia, so I make a lot of references back to their practices, which I think are quite profound. And when we get that notion of self-determination, because I don't think good management learning and scholarship can happen until we know ourselves. And that starts with the students. So getting back to Todd's comment about, Carol, I can deliver theories on motivation or whatever framework we want to get. And a lot of them are really redundant now. They were fabulous back in the 60s, but not necessarily reflective. I always say, rightio, now what's your behaviours around this? Let's track through your day or the last week or whatever. So I think this training on business ethics, yes, we can spout all the policies and rules and regulations. You've only got to open up the Australian media on any one day and you will find really bad, unethical management practice. And it's because we're not thinking, what's the impact on me? We start with self-determination, and once I've sorted out myself, then I've got to think about, well, as a manager, I'm meant to be influencing and inspiring all of you fabulous people that are part of my division or department, and how we're going to manage through the chaos coming out of the post-pandemic. Okay, now what learning? And it was interesting what you said about engineers only have come out, 10%. Yeah, of course, knowledge is redundant in the middle of the minute they graduate, but what they've learned is all those soft skills. And hopefully the critical thinking, the critical analysis, etc. That's what's going to hold them in good stead. And if we're doing our job right as management, that they're going to continue to be curious. I know in Australia, a lot of our students have lost their curiosity, unless you're giving it to them in a soundbite. What do we call it now? X, not Twitter. So this curiosity, I've got a lot to say on that. I'll pass it over though.
Thanks, Margaret. So I take from Margaret's point, context is very important, isn't it? You've got learners coming from different cultures and places, and you want to engage them and connect with their experiences, and I guess listen to them and have them think critically and creatively. Yeah, and most of our ideas that are taught in traditional management textbooks come from only two places, the United States and the United Kingdom. So it's kind of, I'm engaging my students to think critically about theory, but also to invite them to bring their experiences from their different places and cultures and their experiences of work and management, and create that kind of, hopefully, a more engaging environment where they are curious. Carol.
So I really wanted to jump in here because I think I can tie these together in a nutshell that you can take away. There's an acronym that my co-author, Alyssa Perry, developed for our book, and it is less is more. LESS, local context, experience, stakeholders, science. You had used the term earlier, Todd. We need to teach them both what and how, and distinguish between what and how. As educators, we're kind of used to focusing on the science, right? That's the what, that's the content. But we're also trying to focus students' attention on the importance of local context, using their own experience and making it relevant to their own situation, but particularly thinking about stakeholders. And I think the more we are continually reminding students as educators to think about the consequences of their actions, the more we raise in their mind this idea of a moral responsibility. And I think that's such an important part of ethics, right? It's not what impact does this have on my organization in terms of its bottom line, but what impact is it really having on people?
So I think this is a great conversation and a very important one, and the one that has become very prominent in Canada as well, importance of business ethics. The way I encounter it in my classroom, I don't know if you have this experience, but every class I teach, I ask students a question, what would you do? We talk about CEOs making difficult moral decisions. And a student will say, well, as a person, I would do X, but as a CEO of the company, I would do Y. And you can imagine what the difference is. And the assumption is, and every time it frightens me, I want to cry when I hear a student say that, because the student is basically telling me that when they entered this building and they signed up to be a management major, they feel like they have to leave the ethics at the check-in room, like their luggage, their coat, the hat, and then they left their ethics there. And somehow as this purified being, they're coming in and now they can make rational decisions. And that is very, very scary, right? And we know that actually business education has contributed to that process of creating this purified, rational beings who believe that ethics could be left at home. We're actually teaching them that in a lot of classes apologize for criticism, but in a lot of economics classes, we keep perpetuating this myth, and we keep telling them this is how people should behave, not just descriptively, but this is how people should behave. And that's a problem. That's a really big problem, because our students, you can't live like that. For most people, that's what I tell them. You can't ultimately have double selves. At some level, we have to be authentic human beings to be happy in our jobs, to be happy in our lives. We need to sleep well at night. Ultimately, this is the test of a lot of your ethical decisions. So we have to bring this back into the conversation. And this is why I was very, very fortunate and privileged to be the founding director of the Lately Center for Business Ethics established at McGill, because we needed to bring this conversation much more centrally into business education. And we're very lucky to have been able to do that systematically. I'm going to give it to Christian.
Yeah, I find that really interesting, because I think it really relates to, we talk a lot about how do you make students care, right? Care about the other in the room, care about what they do in the world and who they are in the world, right? Are they kind of like someone who has two sides to themselves? One is kind of, I always love this, the Mahatma Gandhi type, being a light in the world, not necessarily always at home, right? Like the kind of idea, how can you be both in the world? And three things I found extremely interesting and useful. One is, I used to teach at LSE in London, and one of the things there we did a lot was to say, let's send students directly into the context where they can see what an impact they can have directly, immediately. So if you have someone come in who comes out of the city, investment banking, consulting, like, yes, I'm going to make a lot of money. And then we expose them to say, okay, work with a social enterprise or with MasterCard in financial inclusion for a couple of weeks, like on the ground, and see the direct impact you can have when you work with these organizations on the ground. And then come back and tell us what worked differently, right? And what you saw that maybe there could be an impact you can have. And I found it fascinating how many people connect the dots differently after they saw, I don't have to wait for 20 years to make a career plus to have an impact. And I think, to me, that's kind of the biggest question in terms of when students start with us at USC, at LSE. It's really the question of who do you want to be in the world? And, when you look back, what is it that will be truly relevant to you? And I think, most people, I don't know who of you had near-death experiences, but I think most people who had near-death experiences realize that at the end, you don't care that much about, right, how many cars you have in the garage, but more about the people you helped in the world. And I think if we can get instilled in our students. And so two things I found really interesting there is, one, I loved what you said earlier about how do you connect with other students in the room and don't see them as competitors, as the people who will get the same job. Like if they get the job, you don't get the job, right? That's a lot of times in hyper-competitive business schools. And so what we communicate a lot is to say, you know what? A lot of times, actually, you will get the job because that person here recommended you, because they went through the application process at McKinsey and they asked them, do you have other peers who are as amazing as you? And then you say, yes, this person here. And so what you're doing is you're creating that competition, right? Away from pure competition to, no, this person, again, paradox, can be my friend and we can compete for the same job, but actually they might get me an even better job, right? And so it's really those kind of dynamics where I found the hook strategy super interesting at the beginning, just as an educational tool, where when students introduce themselves to each other, that they don't only say, this is my background, this is what I did, but really put a couple of hooks in where they say, and what I'm really curious about at the moment is this, and what I really need help with is this. And when they put out a couple of these hooks, people are always like, oh my God, I thought you were so different, but actually you also have an identity crisis at the moment, or you also are in transition, right? And so it's fascinating how people connect the dots differently. And that's where serendipity for them happens, right? That's where they end up in a completely different field and are so much happier than the field they thought based on their background they had to do. And I think that's, to me, again, the role we can play, that we help them, not exactly like telling them what to do, but actually helping them, shepherding them towards what they feel they really want to do.
Great. Thanks, Christian. And that is a theme developing, isn't it? I think from this panel, not telling them what to do, but how to learn, how to be curious. That's great. All right. We've talked a little bit about AI already, but why don't we focus on that for our kind of main final question? I'm interested what you think are the challenges of AI tools like ChatGPT, but also what are the opportunities? Christian, do you want to start us off?
Happy to kick it off. I mean, we all know the potentiality of it, right? It's fascinating to see everything from how can it help with creating syllabi to career, right? When students look for careers and just put in, this is what I'm interested in, this is the skills I have, what could it be? All these different areas that become a map, right? You can visualize it, you can see what you could be. Like it's a fantastic potentiality, I think, that it can help with. At the same time, it can be overwhelming, right? So there's so many options. In the morning, actually, I typed into ChatGPT, what can you help me with? Or like those kind of things. And how could you help us in the classroom? And I think a lot of the answers that ChatGPT provided were around kind of simulation, gamification, like really this idea of how can we make it more fun to be in the classroom? And I think that's where I see a big use. But so I think that's just the practical use, but I think there's some philosophical dimensions behind which I find really interesting. One is, what does it do for social equality in the sense of, non-native speakers who, when they have to write an essay, I have a lot of students who come from around the world. They then, after 2 months, have to write an essay that they're graded on, and they compete with, people who are native speakers who kind of like write it down, and they kind of have those language barriers partly. And so it's interesting, I think, to see how can we as educators build artificial intelligence into how students work so that we level the playing field a bit more between those who might not have the absolute knowledge skill, language skills, but actually have amazing intellectual capability. And so I think there's a lot of the leveling the playing field first, and then second, really this, how kids had their imaginary friends, like there's someone. I feel that's kind of like ChatGPT is kind of this real imaginary friend type becoming like being there as a sparring partner, right? So in a way, when I have an idea in terms of like, hey, does this make sense? I literally kind of just ask it and feedback a little, and it's my sparring partner. It's of course more fun with real people, right? But it's kind of when you're at 2 o'clock at night, right? You had an idea, you just kind of communicate a little bit and find interesting solutions. And I think that's kind of the interesting thing where at the end of the day, I think that will be the best use also of how, in a way, we see it more as something, do I fully trust that friend? No. Like, do I double check that friend? Absolutely. But do I feel that is someone who can inspire me? Yes. And so I think that's kind of the interesting, how do we capture the potentiality, but also don't get lost in that they can solve everything for us. Thanks.
I want to really double click on the way I think Christian has put it right. It has to be a friend, and it has to be seen as a sparring partner. I think that's a very, very accurate characterization. It's very much my view on it as well. Because I think in general, in education, the initial reaction to ChatGPT was a knee-jerk reaction. No, we're terrified, because we don't know what to do with it, and initial reaction is to prohibit it. So we're supposed to put on our syllabus right now that students are not allowed to use ChatGPT. Now, the truth is, if a student tells you they're not using ChatGPT, they're not being entirely honest with you at this point. I mean, I'm sorry to break it to you, but this is the reality, and this is something we have to live with. So I think, we don't have any other way to go than accept what Christian is, telling us we have to incorporate into our teaching. Similar to Christian, before I came to this panel, I used ChatGPT. I put one of the questions that was initially written. I was like, let's see what it comes up with, and as I'm sure a lot of you in this room, we're all starting to use it. We're all experimenting with it. It is there. Of course, it does raise important ethical issues, but one way not to handle ethical issues is we have to talk about them. So how do we do this? I think as academics, we do have to bring, as teachers, we have to bring ChatGPT into the classroom. We can't simply prohibit it. I will use it starting this year. I'm talking to the students, and again, this is something we can talk about later, but one of the privileges of our profession is I interact with a lot of young people. And that's super, super exciting because I can learn a lot. So I get the students to do the work for me. I literally sit them down and I say, okay, how have you used ChatGPT? And we're going to try to sift through those experiences of them having used it over the last 6 months and try to craft assignments that we can actually do in the classroom where we do this together with students and we discuss what worked, what didn't, and also, how should we think about grading this thing? Like, what do you think is going on here? How would you feel if your classmate submitted this? And how should I approach this? And this is the only way to go forward. We have to co-learn in real time with our students. And quite often we have to be led by them because they're way, way ahead of us on how to be using this thing. So I've seen wonderful examples of assignments using ChatGPT where instructor guides students, here's the project you have to accomplish, writing a cover letter, talking about like people whose native language is not English, that's ChatGPT is so well suited for that. And what is the reason why we would prohibit students from using that if that's what they're going to do in real life? However, on the other side, it also very, very important to bring real professionals into the classroom to talk to students about how is this actually playing out in the workplace, and to hear some reality about this. And the reality about this is that any manager will tell you, I don't care who wrote it, it's your ass on the line. If you wrote it and you can't, ChatGPT is not an excuse to get something wrong, right? And believe it or not, our students already know that. They know, they tell me that ChatGPT gives fictitious references and it can say things that are wrong. It's our job to just keep coming back and double clicking on it and making sure that everybody understands how this algorithm works so they can use it effectively to their benefit, but not to pay for its mistakes. So we have to empower them to use it as effectively as possible.
Yeah, so talking about going back, if we go right back to the first industrial revolution, where all the textile production workers in the northern England were all doing hand looms, and then someone came up with the invention of mechanical looms. They were wooden. We all know this story. We've taught it. Very noisy and whatever. And all the hand weavers were really, really threatened. So what did they do? They burnt the looms. But they were quickly reproduced and built, and then eventually they became very competent at using them, and the rest is history. I now say we're in the fifth industrial revolution. We've whooped through revolution 4, the technology. Now we're into this whole new landscape of AI. And if any of you are familiar with Martin Kitchener and team from England and Wales book on purposeful business schools, he talks about how there's a massive shift from instrumental to organic. Now, the thing that bothers me about AI, and we're having very deep conversations at work on this, is that it's homogenizing all our cognitive capacity. We're going to come out as these little, we're forgetting our distinctive uniqueness. What makes my cognitive? So I do a lot of work on metacognition with students and leading into AI. Now, I've had the privilege of living many decades and hopefully many more ahead. I've seen massive shifts in technology. To me, this is a new one. We've always had students who are going to take whatever shortcut they can to graduate. But I think it's on us as management scholars. We've now got to be a step ahead. We've got to be creative in the way we design our proof of learning. I mean, writing an essay, a report or whatever is just proof of learning. But there are many other diverse ways of proof of learning. And last night we got together for dinner and we were talking about AI, and we're all going to go back to a fair part of our curriculum design now as oral-based presentation, because this is also a skill they need, particularly at undergrad level, even postgrad level, depending what we come on. So is it switching us too much back into instrumental practice and homogeneity rather than, okay, what's your unique distinctiveness? So if you're going to go for a job interview on graduation and you've got ChatGPT to write your responses, you're going to be as vanilla as all your competitors. How are you going to set yourself apart? And that's what I try and get my students excited about, is that through that positive optimism lens, POS theories that we all know, is what's your unique distinctiveness? How are you using technology? ChatGPT is just one. We've got Bard coming up. I mean, all the top 5 who are out there with these huge data banks are well ahead in what they're doing. How are we going to capture it? And I think it's up to us to redesign our curriculum, but particularly our proof of knowledge. Thank you.
So just to take us out of the classroom for one moment, one of the things that I think is really interesting as a workplace trend is probably 5 years ago, we were talking about artificial intelligence as a tool that employers use, right? We're building it into resume screening. We're using it in hiring. And now the conversation shifts, right? How are employees using AI? And frankly, I think that bidirectionality is super healthy. I loved what Elena said about, here's how instructors use AI. Here's how students use it. I think the more we recognize that this is a tool that is available to everyone, the more it forces us to write good policy about it. As you say, we can't just prohibit it. We have to say what's good about it, what's valuable about it. And just linking together Christian and Margaret's comments. I liked your term sparring partner, Christian. The term that I usually use is think, pair, share. And it's just that you're using a different sharing partner. And if we can get students to do that, to recognize how the answer that they generate on their own, drawing on things like their experience and their local context and what they know about stakeholders, they can actually produce better answers than ChatGPT can. Wow, isn't that a way to inspire them for the future?
Thanks, Carol, and everyone there. So the final question is, what's your one piece of advice for management educators when it comes to teaching? And I'll start us off on that one. Mine is to publish on your teaching. I've made a career out of publishing in management education and learning journals. I was formerly a co-editor-in-chief of Management Learning and now associate editor of Academy of Management Learning and Education. There are two other great journals in our field, Journal of Management Education and Management Teaching Review. These are highly read outlets and also highly cited. So I found that publishing on teaching is great for my research career, but actually also great for improving my teaching, to be more thoughtful and to look at research on teaching and to share experiences of my teaching and learn from other experiences has been really a great way of bringing the kind of the dual roles of researching and teaching together. So that's one piece of advice. What else have we got from the panel?
I think part of our role as management educators and scholars is that we're actually building flourishing, robust civil societies. And we have deep knowledge about a lot that I think we take for granted. And someone before mentioned stakeholders. And I think we need to do a better job as our value in the external stakeholder group. We should all be sitting on government advisory boards. We should be all on high-level industry boards, because we've got the recent research, we've got the knowledge and the smarts that I think we can be a critical voice and therefore overturn a lot of the inequities and disparities that we're currently seeing in our civil societies that's leading to uncivil societies too frequently at the moment, because people are afraid. So my one piece of advice is we get our reputation through our publishing and our scholarship, but we then need to go and promote ourselves out through whatever channels so people notice and think, yeah, I've got to get Carol Kulik on this South Australian Government Advisory Board, quick, smart. Thank you.
So my advice is a little bit, I think it goes back to something I said earlier, and when I advise my young colleagues who are just embarking on this journey, is really to remain open and to be prepared to learn and to learn from your students. And that sounds kind of bizarre, because a lot of times the assumption is that we're the professors, we're the esteemed doctor, this and this and that, and we're there to actually impart knowledge to them. But the truth is that it's a huge privilege to interact every year with a cohort of young, in my case, they very young people to medium young people with very diverse experiences, with a lot of kind of work experience coming from different places, and to be able to learn from them and to allow them to challenge my ideas. Yes, I've read a lot. Yes, I've done a lot of research on these things, but every year I learn a lot from my students. And over my teaching career, my students have fundamentally transformed how I think about the world. And particularly one example is issues relating to sustainability that are very, very big in Canada, very big at McGill right now. Seeing generations after generations of students and seeing how important sustainability is in their lives. And increasingly, projects more and more focused on sustainability. Those are the issues that students raise in class. They keep coming back to these topics. It really has transformed how I, as an educator, I think about this. And then I can go back, and again, I can readjust my class syllabi, or I can definitely readjust my own thinking. So I think being open and being willing to co-learn with students, that both of us, me and my students, we're facing this rapidly changing dynamic world full of challenges, and I don't have the answers. That's the fact of life. It's them and I can figure it out together.
Great.
Every year we do it again and again and again.
Great, thanks. I've got the hard job of timekeeper here. So Christian, 60 seconds, your one piece of advice, and then we'll come to Carol. And then hopefully there's about 10 minutes left for questions. Thanks.
Fantastic. It's 3, so 20 seconds per each. So one is transparency. I think we talked about that, similar to how we do research methods. We want to say, okay, I wrote this. This is what the computer, or this is what the robot did. This is what I did. So for us and for the students, so the transparency piece. Second, the role model piece. The business cases we give people, is it just always the kind of 80-year-old kind of senior executive who's usually white and in North America, or is it someone who actually kind of like, is someone relatable directly to the students? And third, I think, closing with, my favorite quote of Goethe, which I think relates beautifully to this. He had this idea that if you take someone as who they could be, you make them capable of becoming who they can be. So assuming that the student comes in as this kind of, the raw kind of diamond, and our role is to kind of help them shine, but not by kind of polishing them ourselves, but by kind of like putting them out there and then letting them find the kind of best polishing that could be out there. And so I think really kind of this idea that there's so much potentiality in everyone, but if we put them into a box and say, you do an MBA in consulting, so you're supposed to be a consultant, then in a way that's kind of like, a route to depression often, versus if we're saying, look, like we know you come in for this, but we expose you to a lot of other things, and then you pick, and then you see what's the best for you. And I think that's kind of our role in this world that's changing so fast that, ChatGPT might be the key consultant in 2 years. So like, who knows, right? So it's kind of really this idea that allowing for potentiality.
And my one piece of advice for management educators is to remember small steps. I feel like as management researchers, we are really focusing on big, important problems: climate change, world poverty, social inequality. These are really big problems. They need really big solutions. And that can be super inspiring for students. It can also feel incredibly daunting. So I think it's really important that in the classroom, we point the way. Together we will co-design a pathway, but we need to give them, what's the one thing you can do tomorrow on the ground? We're going to create more change, one person at a time, one step at a time.
Thanks, Carol. Michael, are you going to coordinate the questions?
So welcome questions anytime, and I'll walk and bring the microphone to you just so we can catch it on the recording, and then we'll have the team answer from there. So we can start right here.
I love all the comments that you made today. It sounds so powerful that you incorporate it into your own teaching. What I'm wondering is, what's holding back the field from having this more widespread? And so it's the typical occurrence that the type of teaching that you talked about today, is it structural? Is it professional development? Is it content? Is it all manner of different things? What could this great Academy of Management group do to sponsor more of that thought moving forward?
Well, I think we need to teach with different resources. I think, I'm a big critic of these large best-selling textbooks. I don't use one myself. It's too much of the old model of, here's all the knowledge that you need to learn. It's not engaging students. It's not respecting the different contexts that they come from. So I think a good place to start would be to say goodbye to those books.
And building on this, the question of, again, what is the role that we have? If, the first advice to PhD student is, focus on publishing and don't worry about the teaching, and then kind of take, like, if you have half an hour, like, update the syllabus of your colleague and then like just teach it, then there's no real incentive, right? To in a way teach, and to also get excited for teaching. It's this kind of old rule, right? You get excited about something once you're doing it, once you see you're good at it, once you enjoy it. But if that's not what you really want to develop as a capacity and capability, then that might not happen. So my kind of key is really, let's go to all the deans here of the business schools and universities and say, look, like, let's shift the incentives here in terms of, if you really go back to what is your role here, and you talk so much about business models and things, well, your key business model is your student, like, being here and paying for their education. And so let's shift those in a way that is smart, right? Like, everyone, of course, appreciates the kind of whole idea of tenure and the whole idea of we need measurements on that side, but maybe we also need to then kind of at least balance that a little bit more, the importance of teaching in that.
Thanks, Christian. Margaret?
Yeah, I think a starting point would be to go to our alumni recently graduated and say if they could change one thing about the university, because often I do think it is institutional traditions that maybe haven't moved with our thinking and time. I mean, the huge billion-dollar enterprises, a lot of them now are on business models I'd be going straight to alumni and saying, tell us what we could do differently to make the experience of the next group coming through.
I'm just going to echo that issue about reward systems. You know, I think we need to produce change within our universities and recognize innovative teaching, recognize the alumni who say, this really made a difference to me in my career.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else with any questions? Here.
Maybe just a question on proof of knowledge that Margaret was talking about. Since there's this current debate around knowledge versus wisdom, and I think this accountability piece of universities in general measuring their own impact, which is usually non-existent in form of KPIs. Theoretically speaking, what would be the proof of wisdom if we were moving to that, connected to accountability of, are we being effective with what we're trying to impart?
I think wisdom is emergent and often it comes much later, which is why I think we need to tap more into our alumni. One thing I always do at the end of semester is get them to reflect back to week one when they walked into the classroom and what had they learned. And it's not just the academic knowledge, it could be knowledge. Now, out of that comes some wisdom because they will recognize about their own personal growth and development. Are we ever wise? If you could look back 5 years ago, what is wisdom? But at the moment, I think we are all measuring proof of knowledge or proof of output, and it's a very transactional, and I think we've got to get more into the transformational, but I love that, and that's just triggered something that I might work on when I get back. Thank you.
And building on this, I think that's such an interesting point also. I think it comes to student evaluation also, right? How do we know that someone really learned something? And, you know, something that I found very useful is to say, traditionally, maybe we did a case study and then we would say, you know, hey, great, write a paper about, you know, about this case study and reflect on it. And now, obviously, ChatGPT could do a lot of that. So what we're doing is to say, I want you to reflect after we had the in-class discussion, reflect on the different perspectives that you've heard, refer to the different perspectives that you've heard, and then do that. So ChatGPT would have to listen in, right, to be able to actually know who said what in the classroom. And so it's really kind of making it more idiosyncratic to the classroom discussion itself, to the people in the classroom, which also then has the additional benefit of really that kind of relatability piece, that they really listen more actively to each other and kind of try to understand the other's position versus only their own. This is my hunch about the case. And so I feel that kind of evaluation where we pair exactly what Margaret said in terms of the piece that is the knowledge piece, but also then the reflective piece. How do I fit into this and how do the others fit into this?
Yeah, thanks, Christian. And coming back to one of your earlier points, which I think is so important, if we're not passionate about what we're teaching, we can't expect our students to be passionate about their learning. So having the courage and the freedom, I think, to be able to bring ourselves into the classroom, our perspectives, our research, I think is going to engage students well.
Great, thank you. Any other right here?
Just a quick question. You talked about the different modes of assessment and knowledge, etc. And I'm assuming not the only one. Since COVID, a lot of our teaching has moved towards online. A lot of it is asynchronous because we have students in different time zones, etc. So I was wondering, I can totally see how you do all these things in the classroom, right? Listen into what was said in the classroom, and so you cannot use ChatGPT, etc. But how do you have any ideas in terms of implementing those kinds of assessments, other things, exercises in especially the asynchronous online space?
That's a good question, obviously.
So the funny thing is, I actually really enjoy teaching on Zoom. I know that probably makes me a huge outlier. Not that so asynchronous, but also one thing I discovered. I'm a big fan of podcasts. And that's actually an incredible medium for us as management professor. Okay, I don't teach accounting, so let's be clear. Like, I teach international business, but to me, they're much better than recorded videos because they allow the students. So I tell the students, look, you can be doing dishes, you can be going for a walk, and I'm going to be gently telling a story in your ear. And one thing that was really like once you're respecting student and you're giving them a lot of autonomy, a lot of freedom to how they engage with content, right? So they don't have to stare at your face for an hour. I mean, that's horrible having to stare at a screen. So, but what it forced me to do as an instructor, as I looked at my notes, like I taught that stuff for 10 years, right? So I knew like how to teach it, but I had to come back and reevaluate, and it forced me to tell stories. Like, so all the stuff that I had to convert it into a story like you have on a podcast. You know, you have section A with an introduction, you have section B, you have section C, and each one of them has to be a little story. And that was a different mode of delivering the same content, right? But, you know, it worked. They loved it. They really, really loved it. So that's the positive side. I'm not saying, you know, it's great, but that was the positive side of it. And the other thing that I do a lot of is have students engage on the chat boards through variety of ways. For better or for worse, this is what our students are used to doing. They're comfortable with it. This is their lifestyle. You know, my opinion doesn't matter anymore, apparently. You know, so that's what we do. One of the things that I do that helps to link the two and helps get students engaged and avoids the whole chat GPT issue is I ask students to find recent news article relating to a concept discussed in class that forces. So the benefit to me, I can use 20-year-old cases and the students don't complain because they see that the concept is still relevant. But also, it keeps them engaged in the news, and they have to write something coherent about this article, which, I don't think there's a way to get ChatGPT to do that. I couldn't do it. I'm not smart enough. So maybe my students can do it. But something like that links reality to course material is really a way to kind of sidestep some of those issues.
And over the last couple of minutes, I've just been thinking about time. And maybe as educators, we need to kind of think out of the box about time, thinking about it in two ways. Elena saying, I'm using podcasts, so this piece of it is kind of pre-prepared. Maybe that frees up the educator's time to engage with students in a different way about the application or the use of the material. But the other thing I was thinking in relation to the previous question is, wouldn't it be wonderful if the assessments that universities made about educators wasn't from what did these students think about the course right now, as opposed to let's think about what these students think 2 years from now after they've been out using it, like what's the thing that they remember? What's the way that they've applied? And, I'd love to see us devote some university resources to that.
Great.
Yeah.
You go. 60 seconds and then we're going to wrap up.
So I think psychological safety is really important with online. My student satisfaction scores actually increased because I very firmly positioned a relational leadership approach. And one thing I did was set up a 15-minute Teams meeting with every student, either pre-sem or first week, just to get to know you, get to know me. I've got students from all over the world. A lot of them aren't that forthcoming, particularly on online. They've got huge concern about a whole lot of factors that I won't go into now. But that psychological safety, you get that right, everything else is possible and they'll contribute and engage.
All right. Thanks, Margaret. Carol's been thinking about time. I'm thinking about time. We're out of time. Thanks very much to Michael and the Academy of Management team for setting this up. Thanks so much to the 4 panel members, but especially for you here in the room coming and those joining online. It's been a really fascinating session. Thank you.